What's up, everybody? Nathan here with another episode of Freelance Jumpstart TV. And before we get in this episode, I have to say a couple of things. I am not a lawyer, I am not a tax professional, and I am not giving you legal or tax accounting advice. Before we get into how to choose your own business structure as your own legal identity, I wanted to share a little bit of my backstory of how I came to know the differences between each business structure. So in an earlier video, I talk about how I first validated my business idea by making sure I got paid. There's a video where I talk about how I became a freelance web designer, and I validated this idea by making sure I got paid. So that's one thing, I had income. The other thing I did is I settled on a business name. So I finally came to the point to where I knew what name I would choose for my business, and that's another video you can check out as well. So now that I knew what my business name would be, and also I knew that I validated my business idea, I wanted to take the time to set up officially and legally as a business for a freelancer. So I looked around online and I found a highly recommended tax professional. So I went to see this guy, called him, set up a meeting, and drove to his office and met up with him. So I first walked in, told him a little bit about my business, what I was doing, what I planned to do, where I planned to go, and kind of just laid everything out for him. And I had some questions written down ahead of time. So I sat across from him. We're talking just like we're talking now. The guy was like, okay, so what questions do you have? So I asked my questions, and he said, that's a very good question. Let's go to irs.gov. irs.gov, okay. And I asked another question. He said, that's a very good question. Let's see what irs.gov has to say. He went ahead and looked at it and read to me off the website. I asked a third question and he did it again, and I caught the hint. I guess I just should have went to irs.gov because that's what he was doing. But I bring up that point to say that's a good thing to learn from. Thanks to the internet, we have access to information, and the correct information. We just need to know where to look. So asked him a few more questions, he expounded upon it, and then I went home and studied. I looked at the differences between the various business structures on irs.gov. I noticed they had, a sole proprietorship, a partnership, an LLC, a corporation, and an S corp. Those are the type of business structures that I found on the website. So really, it just came down to how was I going to go through the process of choosing the proper business structure for me. The first one I took note of was the sole proprietorship. And from what I found, sole proprietorship is when a sole individual wants to operate a business, they're the sole owner of the business, and that particular business is tied to their own personal legal identity. So what I mean by that is when you take the time to file taxes, I found that when you're filing taxes, it's really going to be connected to your own personal name and your own personal social security number. So in other words, you have to file taxes on the profit and loss of your business when you're a sole proprietor. So really, that's pretty much it. That's the quickest way to get started being a sole proprietor. That's what I found when I looked at that particular thing. I made note of it and I wanted to check out the other ones, so I moved on. The next one up is a partnership. And a partnership, from what I would say, is like the plural version of a sole proprietorship. In other words, two or more people can form a partnership, but it's still tied to your own personal social security number, your own personal accounts. In other words, when it's time to file taxes, an individual or the members that are a part of the partnership, what they would do is they would each file on the profit and losses of the business. I saw that, I knew I didn't necessarily want to start a partnership, but that was still good to know what it was, and it was important just to know. Moving on from there, I saw an LLC, a limited liability corporation. But before getting into this, I'm gonna move on to the other ones because it'll be a little clearer to explain what an LLC can do once I explain everything. This led me to want to find out what a corporation was. So when I finally found out what a corporation was and I read, what it really showed was a corporation is when one or more people want to get together to form a business, but there's a fundamental difference between this and a sole proprietorship or a partnership. The main difference is you're your own legal identity and the business has its own legal identity. That's what I found. So in other words, when it's time to do taxes, an individual would do their own personal taxes, but they would also do taxes on the corporation. Also, corporations are more appropriate if you have employees and you want to pay those employees. You're gonna have to pay employment tax on those employees, but also you'll probably be drawing a salary from a corporation, and that's what I found. You know, if you have a corporation, even as the business owner operator, you would be taking a salary more than likely. Not only that, but also if you wanted to go public and issue shares and stocks, that's a whole intricate process, but the corporation setup is the one you would want to go with when it's time for that. So that's what I found in looking at what a corporation was. Similar to a corporation, there's something called an S Corp. An S Corp is a little more strict to create in comparison to a corporation. You have to meet certain qualifications. But from what I found in looking at the details of an S Corp, it's very similar to a corporation. The main difference is the profits and losses and taxes that are filed on the business, they're passed on to the shareholders. In other words, an S Corp, when it's time to file taxes, it would say, okay, this is the profit and loss for the business. Each of the individual shareholders, it is their responsibilities to file taxes on the profit and losses of the business. Not only that, but each individual shareholder will be taxed at their specific tax bracket and their tax rate. So the main difference between all the business structures from what I was seeing has to do with when you're taking the time to file taxes on all of them. So this was very important for me to find this out because I wasn't even sure where to start when it came to taxes, but it was good to get ahead of the game and learn this ahead of time before I just jumped in there without knowing everything. Okay, earlier I mentioned an LLC and I said I'd come back to that. So now is the time I'm gonna come back to that. An LLC is a limited liability corporation, and from what I found, it is also a way to start a business, but to create your own legal identity separate from your personal account for that business. So the business is its own legal identity. An LLC, from what I found, is very specific to what state you live in. So each state has different rules that differ as it depends on where you are, right? So I'm in Texas. It's a little easier and straightforward in Texas, but if you live in California or New York, you have many different rules that you need to check on for that. But for me, it's a little more straightforward because getting a business up and running in Texas, pretty easy. I also learned that an LLC is the most flexible type of business structure there is, and this is why. When you elect to have an LLC as a part of that, when it's time to file taxes, an individual would say, I am going to file taxes as a corporation, or as an S Corp, or as a sole proprietorship, or as a partnership. So in other words, the LLC can elect what type of business structure they choose to handle their taxes. And that has to be claimed, and there's a form for that. That's pretty much the process of an LLC. So when looking at all the business structures and taking in all this information and learning all of these things, it was really just helpful to know everything up front, what they are, what they can do, what forms I would have to submit, really to get up and running. And I took a route where I wanted to get up and running quickly, and that is to start a sole proprietorship. And the reason I chose that first over an LLC or over anything else was simply because I wanted to get up and I wanted to get running, and it was the quickest way to do that. Also, I wanted to test what would happen. I didn't know if my business was going to thrive and do well, or maybe one day income would stop and I would maybe move on to something else. So it was really just a way for me to say, let me test out my business idea, let me go forward with it, and if it's successful, I can always transition to an LLC later. That's what I chose to do. Now that you've seen the difference between my story and all the different types of business structures there is, definitely check out what they are in more detail. You can review this video again or some other resources I have. There's a whole blog post I wrote on my blog that really talks about the differences between each business structure, and really even what forms you would be responsible to file when it comes time for taxes. So really just take the time and look at those and ask yourself as well, what is most appropriate for me? Those are a few of the differences between the different business structures, what they mean, and really what I learned in just trying to figure out what route to go. So once you understand what each of them can do, it's really not that difficult to choose what's more appropriate for you and your business, similar to how I chose what was appropriate for me at the time. And it's not set in stone. You can move on to a different type of structure later and restructure. That's what I found as well. As always, thank you for checking out this video. If you have not yet, I'm shocked if you haven't, definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can get more videos like these. I'm transitioning next week to many more different types of videos. These first couple of videos have really just been in getting started mode. Now we're gonna get into hustle mode, marketing, and all the other topics that it really takes to be a successful freelancer in the next couple videos. There are show notes for this particular episode. As always, you can check that out. And as I mentioned, the corresponding blog post that's on my blog as well. And I will definitely catch you in the next video. See ya.